welcome to the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage, MLK spoken word event. I want to thank you all for registering and attending today. And I'm just going to start with a few kind of opening announcements before I introduce our speaker and we move into the program. So before we begin, I just want to take a second here to read a brief land acknowledgement statement. So we begin by acknowledging, with respect, we gather today in Lenape-Hoking, traditional homeland of the Lenape people for tens of thousands of years. Sometimes translated as original people, the Lenape were known as mediators and called the grandfathers by the entire Algonquin family tree of languages. Within the first 100 years of foreign contact, 80% of the Lenape had already died from violent conflict and disease. In spite of the famous peace treaty between William Penn and the Lenape chief, Europeans forced the Lenape westward and northward to Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario. But some Lenape have never left. Hiding in plain sight as keepers of the land, the Lenape Indian tribe of Delaware, based in Cheswell, Delaware, the Nana Ohemaa Lenape Tribe Nation in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and the Ramapo Lenape Nation in Mahwah, New Jersey are three of the thriving Lenape communities today. So let us acknowledge the historical and ongoing presence of the Lenape and the Nanacoke on this land where we now live, work, and celebrate all our relations. So thank you for joining us. The Jane Littleton Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. First, I'd like to congratulate the state of Georgia for its historic win, which has not gotten as much news in spite of many of the events that unfolded last weekend and the attempted coup by insurrectionists in demonstration of white supremacy. So for the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage, our mission is to continue to collect, preserve, and share the history of Delaware's African American history. We are part of the Delaware Historical Society, and we have a number of upcoming programs in celebration of Black History Month. And that includes a two-part dance workshop with Pieces of a Dream, using select prints from the Delaware Historical Society collection by a local artist. We will be joined by Pieces of a Dream for a workshop in celebration of art and movement. And so if you are interested in this program, and I hope that you'll join us, you can certainly find more information on our event calendar at dehistory.org. I also want to let you know that the Mitchell Center has now launched a new blog, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Kobe Baker, who is the Mitchell Center Outreach Coordinator, to tell you a bit more about the blog and share a link where you can find it. So Kobe.
Thank you, Stephanie. So as Stephanie said, my name is Kobe Baker, the Outreach Coordinator for the Jane Littleton Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. We just launched the blog last year in December. We're really excited about that. We will be uploading exclusive Mitchell Center content monthly. I'm going to put the link in the chat for everyone to see. So this is also, the Mitchell Center blog is also home to Unequal Justice. So if you want Unequal Justice updates, so you can go see the blog. So yeah, so thank you for everyone for coming, and yeah.
Great, so thank you, and you can learn more about some of our other projects as well. COVID Chronicles Delaware, which is a project through the Delaware Historical Society to collect the experiences of all of us as we continue to live through these unprecedented times and this pandemic. Kobe also mentioned the Unequal Justice in Delaware project, and that is a partnership between the Mitchell Center, University of Delaware, Delaware State University, and the Delaware Social Justice Remembrance Coalition, which is documenting the history of racial injustice in Delaware. And so much of this can be found on our website in the Mitchell Center blog, but we'll jump right into the program and why we are all here, which is in celebration of Martin Luther King. And this year, our theme for our program centers on the power of place and environment. And so I am very pleased to introduce our presenter today, Nana Ohemaa Asante, a Ghanaian immigrant. She is a senior honors student at the University of Delaware, pursuing a degree in English and double minoring in medical diagnostics and biology. She has a passion for writing and performing poetry and does her best to find different opportunities, such as the TED, University of Delaware, and the Newark NAACP Virtual Freedom Fun Banquet to share her art. A self-proclaimed storyteller, Nana Ohemaa believes that stories bridge the gap between knowledge and works towards creating communities and environments where people feel comfortable to share their tales and learn from each other. And so on that note, I do encourage you to please use your camera, use your microphone. This is designed to be interactive with you. And as an incentive, for those of you who do engage with us by using your camera, using your microphone, and completing the questions that will be presented to you in the poll, we will give the most active participant a Delaware Historical Society membership. So without further ado, Nana.
Hello, everyone. It is my esteemed honor to meet you all today in remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the legacy that he has left behind. I want to start off first by thanking you for your attendance today. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I appreciate and love the fact that you came to support me. As you heard earlier, I would love this to be as conversational as possible. I will bring my thoughts, my feelings written with the inks of tongue and the tablet of my heart, and my only wish is for you to do the same. So let's see if you can match my energy today. So I have a poll that I want to start off with first, and this is just to help me see your feelings. So I'll give us a couple of minutes to do so. But while you look over the poll, just for the sake of non-silence, I'm an English major, so I love to focus on symbolism in every part of my life. So for this session, I want us to look at day and daylight specifically. As you know, there's a morning session and an evening session. Thank you for coming to the morning session. If you'd like to come to the evening session as well, please feel free, because that's going to be completely different from this session, because I like to shake it up for you all. So. Alrighty, I'll give another like 30 seconds or so. So day, as a time construct, but day as itself symbolizes hopes and conscious decisions. When we wake up, we have certain ideals or certain goals that we have throughout the day. It symbolizes the choices that we actively make. Day symbolizes consciousness. You're awake in the things that you decide to do, but day also symbolizes birth and beginning. You wake up and you feel fresh and brand new, and you go through with a different idea of what you want to accomplish. So thank you all for doing the poll. I see a majority of you, when you think of day, you think of the sun and sunlight. The pandemic has affected the way that you view and interact with the daytime. And a lot of you prefer the day. And I'll keep that in mind, because I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as we go through. But as I said before, day is birth and beginning. As some of you may know, on this very day, 92 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born. That day, January 15th, 1929 marks the beginning of his story, the start of his life, and the foundation of his legacy. So I wanted to start this session with a poem that symbolizes my journey into poetry and my exploration of Dr. King's legacy. A poem that has brought me to this very moment, sitting in front of you today. Exactly 4 years ago today, on Sunday, January 15, 2017, I performed a poem for the MLK Voice for Youth competition. This was the first competition, first public speaking thing I'd ever done in my life. And this poem was birthed through research, through time and effort into understanding how I personally understood Dr. King's words. So here's my poem, The Drought. If I had the chance to ask Dr. King his favorite color, I'd like to imagine he'd respond. All colors have their beauty, but blue has a special place in my heart. For you see, fighting for what is right is never easy. So some days I look to the sky to remember why we fight. And the color blue reminds me of it, revealing the freedom of the birds. That, young lady, is why we fight and what we fight for, freedom. Today, some people may wonder what freedom we are missing. You have a home, family. What more is there to ask for? Like Trayvon, we want the right to walk home with Arizona iced tea and Skittles in our hands. For our mothers not to be scared that we always have our hoods on because we feel it. We feel like it. We like it like that because our ears get cold, because honestly, we can't be bothered by society's depiction of our nappy hair. We want the cops to walk around our neighborhoods and our blood doesn't run cold. We don't tense up or try our best not to look suspicious when we've truly done no wrong. I'm scared for my brother. At 23 and 6'3", he is exactly the size that a cop might find intimidating and dangerous. Even though he is the best worker on his team, that is not a testament that will stay in the back of an officer's mind. Not when the mantra proves itself to be shoot first, ask questions never. With news like the ones we hear today, it is easy to forget how to swim. It makes drowning look so simple. I'm terrified that he'll be in the wrong place at the wrong time, the wrong place at the right time, the right place at the wrong time, because we know that these are all possibilities, and regardless of how you do the math, it still equates as wrong. MLK once said, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." So each day, we, our ancestors, and us today, we prayed for rain. Rain to wash the tear gas from our eyes and to wipe away the black and blue from our bruises. And I hear that when you cry in the rain, it's hard to differentiate teardrops from raindrops. No matter where we turn, we can still hear them. The echoing cries of the spilled blood belonging to those whose deaths were unjustified. Not only to those whose names were publicized, but also to those whose deaths were merely swept under the rug. Blood is thicker than water. So it is the blood of our brothers and sisters that continually rain down on these cracked streets. We are giving racist ammunition. They argue, what about Black on Black violence? We cannot justify the actions of hatred that we spread around our own community. But when it seems like the entire government system is against you, simple anarchy becomes a simple solution. However, oftentimes the most simple solutions are not the best. My mother used to warn me, if you give everyone a piece of your mind, what will you have left for yourself? Ephesians 6 verse 12 begins with, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but look at how fast we've made this about race. Are we not all human? Do we not all bleed red? We have created barriers to push out those who do not look or act like us, and we've allowed others to do the same. But Dr. King taught us to break barriers. There are times in life when you must raise your hands and your voice. MLK announced, we must build dikes of courage to hold back the flood of fear. Our hands were not made for destroying, but creating, leaving behind signs of life. I've learned to press my fingertips to the bathroom mirror each morning to prove my existence. Dr. King taught us to leave imprints, to leave our fingerprints on this world. Our mouths are not made to shout curses, but to breathe words of life. Molded by godly hands with godly intentions, we are all created for a purpose. MLK encouraged, we must accept finite disappointments, but never lose infinite hope. So this morning, I prayed for rain. Not to hide tears, because tears are a sign of humanity. It shows people that you're grieving, that you too can exhibit emotions that we deem are only fit for humans. And isn't that what we want to show them? That we too are humans. We too bleed when stabbed, when shot, when sliced with words of hate and backhanded with lack of compassion. So I pray for rain. Rain to water the souls of the generations, present and later to come. Rain to soften the soils of their hearts to accept seeds of love. I want to sit down with my children one day and say, your mommy was an immigrant. And like how my parents taught me, I will teach you to love the curls on your head, the melanin of your skin, and the history of those who lived before you, who struggled and suffered and cried and prayed every night to survive and bled and died so you can live the way you do now. MLK once humbly explained, we are not makers of history, we are made by history. I will show my children their mold, created by sun-kissed hands, worn palms and bloodied fingernails, formed with the determination and the inspiration of broken bodies and broken spirits. Yet there is a hidden beauty in broken. James 5, verse 18. Then he prayed again, this time that it would rain, and down it poured, and the grass turned green and the gardens began to grow again. I hope it rains tonight. Thank you. Thank you. So with day brings our connection to the outdoors. So I asked you earlier, in the poll, has the pandemic affected the way you view or interact with the daytime? And as I thought so, many of you said yes, but I wanted to ask you why. What has the pandemic done that has affected the way that you think about day? And please feel free to unmute yourselves.
Nana, thank you. That was beautiful. For the way it's affected my day is that my day doesn't end. It's that because of the way we're working right now, it's a kind of a constant on. And because it's remote, it seems acceptable that it just stretches through all the normal kind of boundaries of what a work life and life used to be. And it's the kind of day on a screen rather than a day interacting with people in person and talking and engaging and kind of growing and learning from other people. It's this. So that's my shape of a day has altered that way. And while I'm so excited to be able to get back in human connection again.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Jim.
I can echo Jim a little bit in the fact that for me, being on the computer all day long, it's not like it's a change from the office environment, but it is because I'm not interacting with humans in my breaks. I'm not able to go down and say hello to colleagues. And so being on the computer all day is just really draining. So by the end of the day, I'm shot and I can't do anything that requires thinking.
I definitely understand that. Thank you so much, Sarah. Would maybe like one other person like to go?
I'll say something. It almost feels as though like time has just lost its meaning. It just feels as though like what is a weekend? What is a break? What is a work day? It just it's when you're in the same spot every day at your house and it just you don't go anywhere. It just feels as though like what does it mean that it's 10:22 a.m. Eastern Standard Time? That doesn't mean anything anymore, it feels.
I definitely agree. I can say personally, wasn't even gonna say this. My sleeping pattern has changed a lot being home. Like I already take naps, but I kind of turned nocturnal through this pandemic because it always feels like you're working throughout the day. And since this whole talk is themed on environment, I wanted us to explore environment and the way that we view environment, especially with everything that's gone on in the past couple of weeks, the past couple of months, protests specifically. How do we protest when protest has always been an environmental thing? You've always been outside, you've been able to march, but how can you do that when you don't even feel safe enough to go outside? Not even talking police brutality wise, which is obviously a huge issue as well, but the pandemic itself is keeping us inside. So how do you protest? How do you share your experiences? How do you talk about things that you don't feel should be happening while you have to stay inside? But we'll go back to that in a bit. But I feel that nature is a very interesting teacher, a companion that teaches us through silence and noise. One of my favorite sayings is, if a tree falls in a forest, but there's no one to hear it, does it make a sound? If a Black woman dies on camera, does she make a sound? Yes, but someone will cover their ears and their eyes and say there is no systemic racism in America. If a white man becomes an aggressor to a Black man in an office, do you make a sound? If a Black woman dies and no one protests her unlawful death, do you remember her name? Not always. Seeing that some of our leaders aren't even aware of who we marched for last summer. If a Black boy is lynched, does his mother make a sound while she sobs over his body? With daylight brings the outdoors as a place of protest. And 2020 brought the civil rights movement back in the form of the Black Lives Matter movement. And just like how the planets revolve around the sun, it feels like we are exactly back where we started. A new question was brought up. How do we protest when there is a raging and unforgiving pandemic? When the Black community has such high numbers of death? When people won't even wear masks, and even if they do, some won't even wear it fully over their nose. In my first journalism class, my professor, Dr. McKay Jenkins, took us into the woods behind North Campus. And I was very questioning because I don't know what woods had to do with journalism at the time, but he took us into the woods and he showed us vines that grow on trees, vines that I can even remember stretching all across highway walls. And he taught us that those vines are invasive species. They move into environments that they don't belong and will grow up into the trees until the trees topple under their weight and collapse. That day, instead of sitting in a cramped basement with no windows, my class and I took clippers and machetes and we began to cut down vines. As a kid, I thought those vines were supposed to be there. They're green, right? It was a normalcy I was accustomed to. Further proof that not everything that is assumed to be acceptable should remain. The status quo is not as it should be. Not everything currently legal is permissible. Not everything that has been made permissible is morally correct. The rings on a cut tree don't just reveal its age. They also show signs of environmental changes, like severe drought and extreme heat. Every unlawful and unwarranted death further indicates the type of environment that we live in today. How do we protest when people still call us terrorists? Call the Black Lives Matter movements thugs and a symbol of hate, when all we request is what is right, the right to live, when all we want is justice, it's peace. MLK once said, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. As I'm sure you know, we can't talk about protests without talking about what happened last Wednesday, January 6, 2020. As insurrectionists stormed the Capitol, they were labeled as patriots, heroes of democracy, people who are willing to stand for what they believe in. While I had to watch the civil rights movement come back to life, as I watched people get shot with rubber bullets and handcuffed and taken away in unmarked cars, while I watched in awe of January 6th and somehow not surprised at all, I looked through Twitter and saw many people who supported the insurrection quoting Dr. King. You might know this quote, people use this a lot. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is America? And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And I can't help but to find it morbidly funny because I feel like irony doesn't give my emotions justice. And I've watched with disgust as I see people take Dr. King's words just to grind like bones and swallow on their tongues, and words still live on. They cannot be zombified in the mouths of those who use Dr. King's memory for dissension, use his memory out of context as if they don't only bring out MLK's words to weaponize it against the Black community. People love to quote the Reverend and act as if he was beloved by all. At the end of the day, the fact remains that MLK was murdered. There are people who disagreed so strongly with his declaration of equality that they sent him dangerous messages. They threatened him and his loved ones. They killed him. These past few months have truly tested my resolve, my dedication towards loving others, that agape, unconditional type of love that you give everyone regardless of their relation towards you. Loving thy neighbor feels a lot harder right now when that neighbor doesn't love you back. Dr. King has a very memorable quote. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And another one, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than an evil triumphant. We love each other not because we deserve it, but because we need it. But I wanted to ask you and give you some time to talk. How do you feel Dr. King's words translate today? Do you feel like they're current? Do you feel like they were only for the 1960s and 2020 deserves its own set of rules and rule books? So please feel free to unmute yourself.
All right, I'll go. So I personally think that it still stands still today because we're still facing the same injustices. It might have been a little or slightly better, but it's in a different format. So I wouldn't say it's better. So his word still stands today. We need that type of love because one thing that I've gotten to understand now that racism is it's a form of hatred. So if we're over here protesting, fighting for the justices they were seeking from the past, it shouldn't still happen in today's time. It should have been better since they were fighting. But if we're continuing the same history that's repeating itself, his word still stands still today. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you, Cecilia. I feel that it's very hard to live through MLK's words, just because one thing that happens is it's the idea of history keeps repeating itself and people are getting tired. You know, I'm only 21 and I wasn't even close to being alive in 1968. And I remember watching the protests in my living room, and I remember feeling so tired to the point where it was like, no matter where you went, it was always bad news. And I wanted to ask, like, how did you keep yourself together over the summer? What kept you going throughout all of the protests? What kept you going when it looked like and it felt like things weren't changing at all?
All right, I'll speak to that. I think it was challenging. You know, this summer, particularly, you know, as you mentioned, because of the pandemic and not, I mean, for my own personal safety, et cetera, I would have loved to have been out among the people protesting what is right. But I was concerned about my health and my 80-year-old mother's health, et cetera. So I think it was super challenging to have to be sitting by watching it unfold. I kept feeling so torn between wanting to be out there and having to stay inside and keep myself and my family safe. So I think it was very challenging. The way I kind of got myself through it was I just hunkered down with reading. An English major at heart. I went to Invisible Man and tried to kind of channel myself in some way through different reading and news, et cetera. So it was definitely, and it still is challenging. I mean, this is such an incredible time and your words are so beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you.
That definitely helps. Words help. So, and I think that's the beauty of King too. Those words mean so much. Words are so powerful, for good and for bad, as we're seeing. So thank you for your beautiful words.
Thank you. I really appreciate your participation. I will say this, I personally thrive on people's participation, so definitely feel free to unmute and talk. But yes, I know one thing, because I also agree to that sentiment. I could not go out to protest. Even when it was in Delaware, I couldn't do it because I live at home right now. And as I said before, the pandemic is still raging. There's a lot of hospitals that don't have enough ICU beds. So personally for me, if I'm gonna get real personal, it was hard to feel like you're a part of a movement when you're not even moving. It's hard to feel like you're really with the struggle if you're not sitting with the struggle. Oh, sorry. Okay. So it's hard to feel like you're part of a struggle. You're like really fighting the power when you're home. And I wanted to ask for people who stayed home, in what ways did you try? What ways did you try and support other people? And what ways did you try and support yourself? Because it gets really traumatizing. I know I was looking through social media and this was a thing that came up a lot of the times. It is very traumatizing to see people who look like you dead. It is very traumatizing to see people who look like you be bashed. There was a statue made for Breonna Taylor that I don't think even lasted a week because people went and defaced it. And it's very hard to feel valued in a city of our community and the right to the franchise. And certainly, So please feel free to share your sentiments, your thoughts.
Nana, this sort of relates to also your earlier question, but for me, I tried to hold on to some kind of hope, and I did all that I could in my community here in Delaware to get elected state legislators that I thought would make the most difference, starting really locally where we would feel it, and hopefully that will keep going. So I'm excited that I know they were took their oath of office not that just a couple days ago, and it's the most diverse in all different kinds of ways, the most women, the most people of color that we've had representing us here in Delaware. So I'll continue to then try to have my voice heard to push that action happens and that we can start at least seeing some things here that are going on.
Hi, I'll say something. I've always considered myself a white ally, but this summer I think kind of has like woke me up to how much I don't know and how much more I could do. So I also was afraid of the pandemic, and I have a little one at home, so I couldn't even safely get away. But one of the things I did was, in addition to reading more and educating myself more, was having really difficult conversations with people in my life that I kind of knew where they stood, and was just kind of like, well, you're how you are, and I'm going to ignore your bigotry. And I just like can't do that anymore. So I've had a lot of uncomfortable conversations with family members and even like friends of my parents. I've gotten a lot more vocal, which has then created conversations which have been really uncomfortable. And I think in a way, like, I think I'm ashamed that I made it to 36 years old and everything that happened this summer for me to really open my eyes. But I guess the good thing is once they're open, you can't really close them again. So I'm grateful for the learning for the summer, and I'm excited for when things are back to normal to be able to physically join the movement as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I add something?
Yes, of course.
So I actually went out to go protest, and I still lost a sense of hope. Because for me, when I went out to protest, I saw people risking their health to go fight for justices. And I remember this lady behind me started coughing, and I literally turned, I was like, man, you better back up, you know? So like I risked my life, and I still lost a sense of hope because there's still many people who are just fighting for these justices and they're not getting what they want. So it's the pain that got me. And it's like one thing that I did was like, I know my parents couldn't go out, but we just sat down, we talked about it, we educated it, we talk about the little ones growing up, because I have nephews that I'm literally fighting for, because they're growing up in a perfect world where they like once they grow up, you have to shatter that. And that's the pain that it hurt me. So we had to talk about it. We had to reach out to family back home to make them understand that, like my church, we had a whole debate. So one thing we did is like just start a conversation for people who are some ignorance within the Black community. So yeah.
Thank you. And I definitely agree. There is a saying that people use a lot. You cannot teach an old dog new tricks, but we are not dogs. We're humans. So to go through the idea of, I've lived X amount of life doing this, I'm just going to continue rocking with it. You're allowing somebody to do something wrong. And I've started to realize that the silence that you give, what's the word? Silence is complacency. When you see someone acting a certain way and you let them rock the way you let them rock for the sake of peace, whose peace are you really going for? And that's something that I've learned in all stance of life. When you let somebody do something that actively harms you and you allow it to rock, you're not working for anyone's peace. You're working for a sense of quiet that you think is going to bring peace. I hope that makes sense. Like, you make people comfortable knowing that other people will be uncomfortable. I'd rather we're all uncomfortable at the end of the day. I'm rather we're all feeling really hot in a really warm sweater with no AC, so we can all understand what it feels like to be. Because if somebody is too comfortable, they start doing things that actively hinders people's rights, not even comfort people's rights to live. And I've had to learn, I don't like debates. I'm usually quiet, even though I'm doing public speaking. Like, I stick to myself a lot of the times, but I'm not saying I had time to fight this summer, but I had time to converse. I had time to discuss. Like, I really wanted to see, what do the people that I surround myself believe in? Because the people who are around you define you. And if the people you're around have certain ideals that you don't agree with, people are going to assume straight off the bat that you agree with them. We decide on how we want to classify ourselves based on the values that we hold. And those values that we hold bring people towards us. So if you have one value, but someone in your life has a different value and you're still together, the question is, how strong is that value in your life? Is it conditional? And I think that's a question that I'd had to ask myself a lot this summer. I've had to ask myself a lot during this pandemic. That's, with all the death the pandemic brought a lot of time to think. And I think that's the one thing that I can be thankful for, is the fact that I've had a lot of time to think about who am I and how do people define me? And is the way that they define me the way that I want to continue rocking with? MLK once said, the question is not if we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or love? Someone is always going to look at you and say that you're at a far side. For not even political, but someone is always going to say you're either far left or far right. There is no moderation in life. There is no neutrality. I learned that this summer. You cannot be neutral, because as someone said before in the chat, silence implies consent. Silence implies complicity. When it comes to matters like this, obviously. So I've been doing a lot of research, and I found out that even though the I Have a Dream speech is like the speech that everybody knows, Dr. King was a reverend. Like, he had sermons, thousands of speeches, thousands of talks, and he made his voice known. And I feel like it's impacted me a lot, because at the end of the day, I'd rather be known for what I did in love instead of what I did in hatred. And it is not easy to love, and that is why it is very important to do. The easiest thing, as I said in my poem, simple solutions are not the best solutions. It is very simple for me to block everyone on Twitter, very simple for me to do. And sometimes it's necessary for your mental health as well. But sometimes you stepping up for yourself, or you stepping up from someone else, is showing them that you feel that they're valued. And in 2021, January 15th, a lot of people don't feel valued right now. I watched the news a lot with my family. The day of the insurrection, I sat in front of my TV from the moment the insurrection started till like 2 a.m. And I watched people's responses. And it was very hard to feel hopeful in how divided it felt like our country is right now. It felt very hard to feel hopeful when I felt like my life was not being equal to other people. But we don't live life on an easy mode. And I like to think of life as a video game in a sense. You go through making experiences, and those experience points help you level up into different sets of life. And every day, it is very hard to wake up. It is very hard to get out of bed. It's hard to look on my phone. But every day I'm increasing experience. I'm increasing my knowledge. I'm increasing my understanding of what life is. So the day that I'm truly tested, I know that I won't fumble. The day somebody needs me to step up, the day someone needs me to give them facts, I'll give it to them. Because this pandemic, these past few months have prepared me to be honest, and it has prepared me to stand up for what I think is right. I told you earlier that my class was in the woods cutting down vines. Did you know that there are more trees on this planet than there are stars in the Milky Way? There are billions of trees, billions of stars, but we have more trees on this planet than stars in the Milky Way. We were a class of 25 kids maximum, and even that is pushing it. And in the hour and a half that we were outside, we might have helped out like 6 trees in the span of thousands in the area. Cutting down one vine is not enough. It will never be enough. But if you prepare to snip gradually and you teach other people exactly where to cut, the work is still hard, but the tension begins to elevate because those people begin to snip gradually, and those people teach other people where to cut until we're all cutting. We're all getting rid of the vines that are holding us down, that are literally unrooting us. Dr. King once said, even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. Life is worth loving because life is worth learning. And we all need to find something that we are willing to stand for, that you think is worth protecting, a seed worth planting. And even if you think the world will burn tomorrow, even if you know a vine might come and pull it down, because somewhere, someone is prepared to help cut down that vine and make sure the tree lives. History feels like it's repeating itself. We wake up and we sleep, and we wake up and we sleep, and we wake up and we sleep, and so on. But it's in the continuing cycle that I know there are still victories to be claimed. As long as we have breath, as long as we're prepared to stand up for what is right, to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, Dr. King once said, out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope. We will find that stone of hope. And if we all have stones, we'll pile them together and create an even taller mountain. The daylight represents our conscious decisions, the ones we make and must always justify to ourselves and others. It is the persona that we show other people. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the timeless exertions and passion, concerns of dedicated individuals. The time is always right to do what is right. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This is the same sun from 1968, the same sun that stood over Wilmington as its uprising made itself known to the nation, with the Delaware National Guard staying in the city for 9 months, the longest occupation of an American city by state forces in this nation's history. This uprising occurred the day after MLK was murdered, and people decided it was time to be honest, tell their feelings, and really stand up. This is the same sun. The people may change and the land may be carved into new shapes, but the same sun still shines down on us. It folds itself into the lines of your face, even when covered in a mask. You can look outside at the roads that hold the impressions of our history. The grass still whispers. Just like my poem, it feels like we're in a drought sometimes. But in school, I learned very early on that one thing we need to survive is water. So become a storm. Shake nations, move mountains like a river. Let no one stop your flow. Let no one stand between you and your dream. You will be the cloud that brings the end to this drought. Whether you are at the dawn of your tale or at the dusk, I know this to be true. Your story roots twist and turn and connect in the soils of this land. You have planted yourself in green pastures beside flowing rivers and blooming flowers. It will rain. We will continue to call for rain. And even when it rains, we'll ask for more rain, but one day this nation will be fully watered. There will be no vines to pull us down. Us trees will stand and we will fall when it is our time, not to be cut down. But until then, all we have, or what we have the most, are words. Legacies that will live on. It is your words that give people impressions. It is your words that create memories, and it is your memories that will live on in others even when we pass away. So all I can ask is, let's be mindful of our words. Let's be mindful of the things that we allow as status quo, the things that we allow to happen. And let's create a tradition of being honest, of being loving, of being truthful. And as we stand today or sit in our seats, January 15th, on what would have been Dr. King's 92nd birthday, and he could have been alive, we may never know, but we know this to be true. His words live on. And we will continue to pass these words down generations, and we will remember his sacrifice. And we will continue to sacrifice for our generations, and we will create something worth living for, worth loving for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. I want to open the floor here with the remaining 5 minutes for those of you who may have had a comment or wanted to share your experience or have a moment of reflection, or just if you'd like to just share your voice. I welcome those to unmute their microphones and share what's on your mind or what you're feeling. And please feel free to just unmute and talk. I do apologize if Miranda Wilson, Marlene Jones, I noticed at some point you had your hands. So if you would like to just share what you're feeling.
Well, I'll say just a few words. I felt like part of what got me through the summer was really feeling gratitude for what has happened that is very positive and holding on to that. Also doing something, even if it's something from inside your home. And that was reading a lot, educating myself, educating others, my friends around me. And also, working on the election, trying to get some positive results from that. So those were the things that kind of got me through the summer.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Tim Spalding. Unlike what the letters say up there, I'm Miranda Wilson. I had the pleasure of having Nana in a class in the fall, and I wanted to say that the two things that so far that have gotten me through the summer and through this pandemic, and certainly with the insurrection, has been talking to my sons about this and teaching them about history and teaching them about how history returns in this present moment and how we can see the roots of what has been going on in earlier times. And I do think that Martin Luther King's words live on because he was writing in a volatile time as well. So, and then the other thing that got me through was I had never been so happy to have an African-American lit class in the fall, which Nana was part of. And just hearing the conversations, the impassioned conversations from people in the class who were reading material and really relating the material from decades ago, and seeing the patterns that we could see expressing themselves now. So that was just to be able to kind of engage with those conversations with young people who are impassioned and knowledgeable, and Nana, you were a huge part of that class, and all the work that you've been doing has been inspiring. So very grateful for what you did today, and just being a presence on campus and in the UD community.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I also want to say I've been reading the chat too. Thank you all for your kind words. I really appreciate you all.
Well, just another round of applause, if everybody would, for Nana and her great, excellent presentation this morning, and for not just giving us words that were grounding and personal, and connected to MLK's message, but for all of your voices as well, and your participation, and your faces, and your chat, and your presence, and just being present. And sometimes, at least for me, being present in the day, and just taking that day one day at a time has been my mantra as we've moved through these events together. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will be in touch with our lucky winner for our THS membership based on all the participation that we've had today. So I will be contacting that person via email, and I do hope that you will consider joining us for the evening program with Nana, which begins at 6 o'clock. I'm just putting in the chat a link for our event calendar, so you can also see what other events we have coming up. But I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. And if you could please take a moment to fill out the survey that we have for this program, we would appreciate your feedback, as it will help us improve, kind of work on future programs. And so you'll also be receiving that as a follow-up email. So thank you all, and I hope as you move into your weekend and celebrate MLK's life, that you remember some of the words that Nana shared with us today. So,